The Assassin's Creed franchise has over a dozen games, hundreds of missions, and some of the most brutal difficulty spikes in gaming history. From broken physics engines fighting against you, to full sync requirements that feel like personal attacks from the developers, today I'm breaking down the hardest missions across the entire franchise and explaining exactly why they destroyed us. Starting with a mission that turned every player into a terrible pilot, Airborne. You've spent hours learning how to be a Renaissance assassin. You've mastered swordplay, parkour, counter kills, blending into crowds. You're finally comfortable. And then Assassin's Creed 2 says, "Great, now fly a plane." Ezio climbs to the top of a Venetian rooftop, straps himself into Leonardo da Vinci's experimental flying machine, and launches off the edge. No tutorial, no practice run, no explanation of how the controls work, just you, a wooden death trap, and the entire city of Venice rushing toward your face. Here's where it gets complicated. The flying machine had its own physics engine, and on release, that engine was broken. The controls produced unpredictable drift and momentum shifts that had absolutely nothing in common with the rest of AC2's movement system. You'd tilt slightly left and the machine would lurch like it was caught in a hurricane. You'd try to correct and overcorrect straight into a stone wall. The machine wasn't just hard to fly, it was actively fighting you. But the mission itself? Survivable. Frustrating, sure, but survivable. The real nightmare was keeping that thing airborne long enough to reach the Palazzo Ducale. The flying machine constantly lost altitude, and the only way to stay in the air was hitting thermal updrafts from fires scattered across the city. Miss one fire and you'd sink. Miss two and you'd crash into the streets of Venice like a Renaissance lawn dart, while piloting a machine that handled like a shopping cart with 3 wheels. This wasn't difficulty, this was hostility. The game stopped testing your skill and started testing your patience. The community debate has raged for years. Was this genuinely bad game design or artificial difficulty disguised as spectacle? The near-universal failure rate on release answers that question pretty clearly. When almost nobody can complete a mission on their first attempt, and the reason isn't skill but broken controls, that's not challenge, that's punishment. But at least Ezio only had to fly once. The next mission made players deal with something even worse. Modern-day vehicle controls. Hell on Wheels. Assassin's Creed. Brotherhood is one of the greatest games in the franchise. The combat is fluid, the Brotherhood mechanic is genius, and Renaissance Rome is one of the most beautiful open worlds Ubisoft ever built. So naturally, they decided to rip you out of all that and strap you into a wooden tank designed by Leonardo da Vinci. Let me explain. There's a War Machine side mission in Brotherhood where Ezio has to destroy one of Leonardo's prototype war machines, specifically an armored chariot that functions like a Renaissance-era tank. Sounds awesome on paper. In practice, it's a nightmare. One second you're commanding a literal army of assassins across Roman rooftops, and the next you're wrestling with a clunky vehicle that controls like it was programmed during a lunch break. The tank handles like it's fighting you. Every input feels sluggish and delayed, like there's a full second between what you tell Ezio to do and what actually happens on screen. And normally, bad controls are annoying but survivable. Not here. The mission demands precision while giving you a vehicle built for anything but. Enemy fire comes from every direction, and the aiming is stiff and unresponsive. Take too many hits? Fail. Miss too many targets? Fail. Deviate even slightly from the exact approach the game wants you on. Instant failure. Back to the last checkpoint. Do it again. And that's the real problem. There is zero room for improvisation. The mission runs on a completely fixed linear path, and the game punishes any creative thinking immediately. You can't flank enemies your own way. You can't take a different route. You either follow the invisible rails perfectly or you restart. It's not a skill challenge. It's a memory test with broken controls. This mission is widely considered one of the most hated side missions in the entire Assassin's Creed franchise. Community retrospectives have documented the War Machine sequences as both a creative and mechanical low point for Brotherhood. Even completionists, people who dedicate hundreds of hours to finishing every objective in a game, treat this mission like a root canal. The goal isn't to master it, the goal is to survive it as fast as humanly possible and never think about it again. It's a perfect reminder that Ubisoft kept shoving vehicle sequences into a franchise built entirely around parkour and swordplay, and it almost never worked, but at least this disaster stays on the ground. The next mission on this list takes Brotherhood's problems airborne and somehow makes them worse. The Flying Machine 2.0. If you survived the flying machine in Assassin's Creed 2, Ubisoft had a gift for you. They brought it back. And somehow Leonardo da Vinci, the greatest mind of the Renaissance, made it worse. Brotherhood's Flying Machine 2.0 is supposed to be an upgrade, an improved prototype with better handling and refined physics. That's the in-game justification anyway. In practice, the adjusted flight mechanics feel less intuitive than the original. The controls are floaty, the momentum shifts are unpredictable, and the second you think you figured out the rhythm, the machine drifts into a Roman column and you're dead. And that's the thing about this mission. Any contact with architecture is an instant fail, not damage, not a stumble, immediate desynchronization. The collision detection is absolute. Clip a rooftop with the edge of your wing? Done. Brush a chimney you didn't even see? Done. Rome is one of the most densely built cities in the game, and you're threading a wooden glider through it at speed with zero room for error. But the real nightmare is full sync. To hit 100%, you need to complete the bomber section without getting shot a single time. So now you're not just surviving the flight, you're actively dodging enemy fire while navigating a collision minefield on a timer. Precision navigation and evasion at the same time, using controls that fight you every single second. Take one hit, full sync gone. You either fly a flawless run through a gauntlet of guards shooting at you, or you restart the entire mission. Here's where the community debate gets genuinely interesting. Players started pointing out that Leonardo's upgrades objectively made the machine harder to fly. The AC2 version was brutal, but at least the physics had a logic to them. Brotherhood's version feels like the sensitivity was cranked up while the forgiveness was stripped out, and nobody can agree on whether this was intentional. Did Ubisoft design this to be a punishing skill check on purpose, or did the development team genuinely not realize how disorienting these controls were? It's a fair question. Brotherhood's ground gameplay is some of the smoothest in the entire franchise. The parkour flows, the combat clicks, everything on foot feels refined. Then you hop on Leonardo's flying machine and suddenly you're fighting the game itself. The contrast is jarring. It feels like two completely different studios built these sections, but at least you're fighting bad controls in clear skies. The next mission throws you into a literal storm. The Giant and the Storm. Assassin's Creed. 3's naval combat is genuinely one of the best things the game ever did. Commanding the Aquila through open water, broadsiding enemy ships, feeling the weight of every cannonball impact. It was so good, it literally spawned an entire game built around it. Black Flag exists because AC3's naval missions were that impressive, which makes the Giant and the Storm so much more frustrating because it takes the best part of the game and ruins it with one of the worst design decisions in the entire franchise. Here's the setup. It's a privateer contract where Connor needs to destroy smaller enemy ships to lure in larger, more dangerous vessels, then sink those too. Sounds great, right? Classic naval warfare. Maneuver, aim, destroy. Except the mission doesn't let you just fight your way through it naturally. You're navigating through rough seas, managing multiple enemy ships closing in from every direction, with cannon fire ripping through the water around you. The camera is swinging wildly because the Aquila is pitching through massive waves. Targeting is a nightmare. Positioning is a nightmare. Everything about the environment is screaming at you to just survive. And then the full sync requirement hits you. Sink 3 ships by firing on their powder stores. Let that sink in for a second. The mission puts you in the middle of chaotic naval combat, throws multiple enemy vessels at you simultaneously in rough waters, gives you limited windows to even line up a clean shot, and then says, but hit those tiny powder store weak points specifically. That's not difficulty. That's a contradiction. The mission's own scenario design is fundamentally incompatible with its own success condition. But here's where it gets really insulting. Most players who've actually achieved full sync on this mission didn't do it through natural combat flow. They did it by circling endlessly to line up specific angles on powder stores while getting hammered by every other ship in the area, or by restarting checkpoints dozens of times hoping for better enemy positioning. The solution to the mission isn't mastering naval combat. It's grinding against RNG until the game gives you a clean shot. This is AC3's defining sin with full sync requirements. Someone wrote sink ships by hitting powder stores on a design document for a mission where the seas are so rough and the combat so chaotic that precision aiming is nearly impossible. Nobody playtested that combination. Nobody asked, is this actually achievable through intended gameplay? They just slapped a precision condition onto a chaos scenario and called it a challenge. The naval setting makes it worse, honestly. On land, you can at least scout positions, plan approaches, use environmental tools. On open water with aggressive camera angles and waves of enemies bearing down on you from every direction, you have zero agency over shot placement. The chaos isn't a challenge to overcome. It's a wall that the game's own mechanics can't climb. And AC3 wasn't done making this mistake, not even close, because the very next mission on this list proves that Ubisoft learned absolutely nothing. Public execution. This mission is the perfect example of a game punishing you for doing exactly what it tells you to do. Connor has to infiltrate a public square during an execution and assassinate a Templar target. Simple enough on paper, but the target is surrounded by 8 to 10 guards with overlapping vision cones, and the mission funnels you through a single forced entry point. There's no creative routing, no alternate paths, no figure out your own approach, freedom that the series is supposedly built on. You walk in, the one way the game lets you, and you pray. The full sync requirement? Do not get caught. Let me explain why that's absurd. The guard placement in the square is designed so that virtually every approach angle puts you inside at least 2 detection radii simultaneously. You can't wait for an opening because the patrol routes overlap in ways that eliminate clean windows. You can time everything perfectly, move at the exact right moment, and still get spotted because one guard decided to turn half a second earlier than he did on your last attempt. And here's where it gets truly frustrating. The difficulty isn't skill-based, it's RNG dependent. The guard patrol patterns have just enough randomness baked in that what works on one attempt fails on the next. You're not learning from your mistakes because your mistakes aren't consistent. You fail, try the exact same approach, and get a completely different result. That's not challenge. That's a coin flip with extra steps. But the real insult comes at the moment of assassination itself. When Connor finally reaches the target and triggers the kill, the game locks him into an execution animation. He's frozen in place for several seconds while the cinematic plays out, and the guard AI is specifically tuned to exploit that vulnerability window. So you spend 15 minutes navigating an impossible stealth gauntlet, you finally land the kill, and then you get detected anyway because the game decided to glue your feet to the ground while every guard in the square converges on your position. Think about that. The game punishes you at the exact moment you succeed. This is the core problem with AC3's full sync philosophy. There's a massive difference between a mission that's hard because you need to play better and a mission that's hard because the game is actively working against you. Public execution is the second one. The stealth system isn't robust enough to support the demands the mission places on it. The detection mechanics are too binary, the patrol randomness removes player agency, and the locked assassination animation is a design choice that directly contradicts the stealth requirement. Players have documented attempt after attempt where the only difference between success and failure was pure luck. That's not difficulty. That's broken design wearing a difficulty costume. And if you think Connor's ground missions are where AC3's punishment peaks, wait until the game puts him on a ship. The Battle of the Chesapeake, 3 missions. 3 entries on this list from the same game. At this point, Assassin's Creed 3 isn't just having a bad day, it's a pattern. And the Battle of the Chesapeake is the crown jewel of everything AC3 got wrong about difficulty design. Here's the setup. Connor commands his ship through an extended naval combat gauntlet featuring 3 escalating waves of enemy vessels in open water. You're managing cannon fire, crew health, and ship positioning simultaneously while under constant bombardment. Your supplies are limited. You cannot retreat. And there are 0 checkpoints between the 3 waves. Let that sink in. 0 checkpoints across the entire encounter. That means if you survive Wave 1, grind through Wave 2, and die during Wave 3, you're going all the way back to the beginning. Not to Wave 2, not to a midpoint, Wave 1, the very start, every single time. And here's where it gets exhausting. This isn't a quick 5-minute encounter. Players consistently report the Battle of the Chesapeake as the longest single encounter in the entire game. A failed attempt at the final wave routinely triggers 15 or more minutes of replay. 15 minutes. That's not a difficulty spike, that's an endurance test. You're not losing because you lack skill. You're losing because your brain physically checks out after repeating the same opening sequence for the 4th consecutive time. But the real kicker is the ship controls. They're deliberately sluggish. Ubisoft designed them to simulate realistic naval movement, which sounds great on paper. Your ship has weight, momentum, a wide turning radius. It feels authentic. The problem is that authenticity becomes pure punishment when you're forced to replay the entire sequence from scratch. Every slow turn, every delayed cannon volley, every agonizing repositioning maneuver you've already executed perfectly 3 times before. The realism stops being immersive and starts feeling actively hostile. The community is genuinely split on this one. Some players argue the Battle of the Chesapeake is a legitimate test of naval mastery, that it forces you to actually learn the ship mechanics instead of brute forcing your way through. And honestly, that's a fair point. But the other side of that debate is harder to ignore. When the primary difficulty comes from repeating content you've already beaten, that's not challenge. That's time padding. There's a difference between a mission that's hard to complete and a mission that's hard to sit through. And that's the real legacy of AC3's difficulty philosophy. 3 missions on this list, all punishing for the same fundamental reason. They don't respect your time when you fail. The good news? Ubisoft was clearly listening, because when they built the next game, they fixed almost everything. AC3 broke about naval combat and checkpoint design, and they did it with pirates. Do not go gently. The mission title alone deserves respect. Do not go gentle. Into That Good Night is one of the most famous poems ever written. Dylan Thomas begging his dying father to fight death with everything he has. And Ubisoft took that concept and applied it to a ship captain who absolutely, categorically refuses to die. That's genuinely clever writing. It's also genuinely miserable gameplay. Here's the setup. Edward Kenway boards an enemy brig mid-naval battle. Standard stuff for Black Flag, right? You've done this dozens of times by now. Jump across, kill some guys, loot the ship. Except this time the game locks you on deck with 6 to 8 elite guards and a captain whose health bar looks like it belongs to a final boss. There is no retreat option. There is no escape. The only way off that ship is through a man who embodies the poem he's named after, and that's not even the real problem. The deck space is tiny, absurdly cramped for the number of enemies crammed onto it. Your ranged weapons become almost useless because there's zero room to create distance. Every fight devolves into close quarters melee where you're getting hit from angles you can't even see. But the environment isn't just small, it's actively hostile. Cannon fire from the naval battle happening around you continuously interrupts combat. You'll be mid-combo on the captain, timing your counters perfectly, and then a cannonball rips through the deck and staggers you. The ship itself is trying to kill you while the captain refuses to go down. Here's where it gets frustrating. Black Flag cleaned up almost everything Assassin's Creed 3 got wrong with naval combat. The ship handling was smoother, the boarding sequences were more intuitive, the whole system felt polished and fun. So when you hit a wall like this in Black Flag, it feels wrong. You've been cruising through refined mechanics for hours, and suddenly the game throws you into a meat grinder that feels like it belongs in a different, worse game. The community debate on this one is pretty specific. At the point in the story where this mission triggers, Edward's gear is decent but not maxed out. The question is whether the captain's stats were tuned for a fully upgraded Edward that most players simply don't have yet. His health pool is massive. His attack patterns don't match anything you've fought before. He has unique moves that standard guards never use, and he hits harder than any enemy you've encountered up to this point. Players have documented needing 3 to 4 times longer to kill this captain than any previous boarding target, even with aggressive play and perfect counters. The poem says, "Rage against the dying of the light." The captain took that literally. He rages against every sword strike, every pistol shot, every desperate attempt to end the fight, and the cannon fire keeps coming, and the elite guards keep respawning, and you're stuck on a tiny wooden deck with nowhere to go. It's a brilliant narrative concept trapped inside a difficulty spike that feels borderline unfair. But if you think one stubborn captain is bad, wait until Assassin's Creed Unity throws you into a tournament designed to break you, the tournament. Here's something genuinely refreshing after everything we've covered so far. The tournament isn't trying to trick you. It's not hiding broken mechanics behind cinematic spectacle or punishing you for playing the game the way it was designed. It just looks you dead in the eye and says, be better. And honestly, that's terrifying in its own way. The setup is straightforward. Arno enters a series of timed parkour gauntlets, each one followed by a 1v1 duel against progressively stronger opponents. No healing items between rounds, no combat allies, no distractions. Just you, your timing, and an AI opponent who absolutely knows what you're going to do before you do it. Let me explain that last part, because it's the detail that separates this mission from generic difficulty spikes. The dual opponents are programmed to counter Arno's specific fighting style. These aren't random attack patterns. They reference real historical fencing techniques with specific counter windows that require frame-precise timing to exploit. Unity's combat system was always more ambitious than people gave it credit for, and this mission is where that ambition gets put on full display. You can't button mash. You can't spam parry. You have to read your opponent, wait for the exact counter window, and punish it. Miss that window, and you're eating damage you literally cannot recover. But here's the kicker. The parkour sections leading into each duel aren't just filler. Environmental obstacles throughout those gauntlets damage Arno's synchronization if you touch them. Every wall you clip, every beam you misjudge, every landing you botch chips away at your health before the fight even starts. So by the time you're standing across from your third or fourth opponent, you might already be half dead from the obstacle course alone. And if you fail at round 3 of 4, complete reset. Back to round 1, all of it. Every parkour section, every duel, every frame-perfect parry you already nailed. Gone. Now here's where it gets interesting, because the community is genuinely split on this one. Some players love it. They argue the tournament is one of the only missions in Unity that tests actual mechanical skill rather than exploiting janky AI or punishing you for exploring the open world. It's honest difficulty. You know the rules, you know the stakes, and you either execute or you don't. There's something almost respectful about that. Others find it repetitive and mechanically punishing to the point of tedium. The argument goes that forcing a full restart after 3 rounds of precise execution isn't challenging, it's just time wasting. And when the dual AI requires frame-perfect responses, the line between skill test and memorization exercise gets blurry fast. Honestly, both sides have a point. The tournament represents something Unity was constantly reaching for but rarely achieved. Difficulty that comes from genuine design, intent, rather than technical failure. The historical fencing detail alone shows a level of ambition that most Assassin's Creed combat encounters never even attempt. Whether that ambition translates into fun depends entirely on your tolerance for precision under pressure, but at least the mission is honest about what it wants from you, which is more than you can say for our next entry, because Storming the Bastille wants everything from you and gives you almost nothing in return. Storming the Bastille. On a paper, this mission isn't that hard. In practice, it might be the most stressful experience in the entire franchise, and that distinction matters more than you think. Storming the Bastille is Unity's climactic finale, and it spans 4 completely distinct phases: infiltration, objective completion, a chase sequence, and a rooftop escape, each phase individually, manageable. Most players can handle any single section without breaking a sweat. But here's the thing, full sync requires 0 detection across all 4 phases, no checkpoints between them. One mistake in phase 4 and you're replaying everything from phase 1. That's arguably the longest detection-free requirement in the entire Assassin's Creed franchise. What makes this especially brutal is that each phase essentially plays by different rules. The infiltration section uses standard stealth guards with predictable patrol routes. The objective completion phase introduces new enemy types with tighter detection radii. The chase sequence flips the script entirely, demanding speed over patience. And the rooftop escape? That's where the mission stops pretending to be fair. Let me explain. During that final rooftop sequence, the game deliberately spawns guards behind Arno's current position, not ahead of him where you'd expect sentries to be posted, behind him, where he just was. The architecture is also collapsing mid-sprint, meaning you're simultaneously managing stealth failure risk and platforming fall death risk at the same time. One wrong step, and you either get spotted or plummet to your death. Either way, you're restarting the entire mission, and that's not difficulty. That's manufactured pressure. The game isn't testing your skill during that final stretch. It's testing your composure. Those spawning guards aren't a mechanical challenge you can study and master. They're a psychological weapon designed to make you panic, rush your inputs, and make the exact kind of sloppy mistake that triggers a detection event after 20 minutes of flawless play. Which brings us to the most interesting thing about this mission. The community has basically reached a consensus that Storming the Bastille's reputation for difficulty exceeds its actual mechanical challenge. Players consistently describe it as more psychologically stressful than technically demanding. The individual phases aren't aren't harder than what you'd find in dozens of other stealth missions across the franchise. The guard patterns are learnable, the routes are logical, the windows are generous enough, but none of that matters when you're 18 minutes deep into a flawless run and you hear a detection sound cue behind you on a collapsing rooftop. The difficulty isn't in any single moment. It's in the cumulative weight of knowing that every moment could erase everything. That's a completely different kind of hard. You're not fighting the game's mechanics. You're fighting your own nerves, your own impatience, your own desperate urge to sprint when you should be walking. Some players argue that this psychological dimension actually makes it harder in practice than missions with objectively tougher mechanics. A mission that demands perfect execution for 3 minutes is intense. A mission that demands perfect execution for 20 minutes while the game actively tries to rattle you, that's a different beast entirely. The difficulty lives in the duration, not the complexity. And duration-based difficulty is uniquely punishing because human concentration isn't infinite. The longer the chain, the more likely you are to break it, not because you lack skill, but because you're human. It's a fascinating design choice. Ubisoft built a mission where the fortress isn't the real obstacle, your own psychology is. And for thousands of players, that was enough to make it one of the hardest missions they ever attempted. But here's the kicker. Storming the Bastille isn't even the hardest mission in Unity. There's another one that gets far less attention, but demands something even more punishing than perfect stealth across 4 phases. And it involves a dinner party. LA Touch. Every mission on this list has tested something different. Reflexes, patience, mechanical skill, sheer endurance. But La Touche tests something most Assassin's Creed missions never even attempt. It tests whether you can think. The setup is deceptively elegant. Arno infiltrates a lavish estate during a dinner party to assassinate a Templar named La Touche. Sounds straightforward. Walk in, find the target, blade goes in, walk out. But the second you enter that mansion, you realize this isn't a mission. It's a puzzle box wearing a tuxedo. La Touche is surrounded by at least 3 bodyguards at all times. He moves through the estate unpredictably, wandering between floors, pausing in rooms, doubling back through hallways with zero consistent pattern. You can't just memorize his route and intercept him. You have to stalk him in real time, waiting for a window that might never cleanly open. The mansion itself is a nightmare of interconnected guard patrols and overlapping sightlines. Every room feeds into another room. Every balcony overlooks a corridor. Cover is limited, and the guards are dense enough that moving through any floor feels like threading a needle blindfolded. And then there's the full sync requirement. Do not kill any non-targets. In a mansion packed wall-to-wall with guards, here's where it gets complicated. This isn't a don't get detected condition. You're allowed to be seen, you're allowed to fight, you just can't kill anyone who isn't La Touche himself. That sounds reasonable until you realize that Unity's combat system is designed around lethal takedowns. Every instinct the game has trained into you for dozens of hours becomes a liability. A guard spots you, you counter, your blade connects, and full sync is gone. The entire multi-floor stalking sequence wasted because muscle memory kicked in for half a second. Environmental tools exist, but barely. Poison opportunities are limited. Disguises are scarce. The mission technically gives you options, but the margins are so razor thin that most players who achieve full sync do it by exploiting very specific poison mechanics or manipulating AI pathfinding to create openings that the mission's own design doesn't naturally provide. You're not outplaying the guards. You're outplaying the game's systems, and this is where the community splits harder than on any other mission on this list. One side argues La Touche is the single most intellectually demanding mission in the entire Assassin's Creed franchise, a genuine stealth puzzle that rewards observation, planning, and patience over brute force. They point to the dinner party setting, the multi-floor layout, the moving target, and say this is what assassination missions should always feel like. The other side argues the full sync condition is fundamentally broken, that it punishes every legitimate playstyle the game offers and only rewards players who've looked up exploit guides or stumbled into AI manipulation by accident. That designing a stealth puzzle is great, but designing one where the intended solution requires breaking the game's own rules isn't difficulty. It's bad design wearing a mask. Both sides are right, and that's what makes La Touche the perfect mission to end on, because across every single entry on this list, from the flying machine's broken physics to the Bastille's reputation-fueled anxiety, the hardest moments in Assassin's Creed have never just been about skill. They've been about the tension between what the game asks you to do and what the game actually lets you do. Full sync was supposed to be a reward for mastery, a gold star for the players who went above and beyond, but somewhere along the way, it became something else entirely. A tax on players who refused to cheat, a condition that turned creative problem solving into guide dependency, a system that made players ask whether 100% completion was even worth pursuing. The hardest missions weren't always the most memorable, and the most memorable weren't always the hardest. What players remember years later is how the game made them feel when it finally broke them, and whether putting the controller back together was worth it. For Latouche, for the Bastille, for every impossible full sync on this list, the answer depends entirely on who you ask. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.